It all started with one wrong touch, which fell into the wrong hands, accustomed to taking what they wanted. He entered her life without asking, and her perfect world collapsed in an instant. To gain freedom, she would have to disappear, even if the cost was everything, even herself. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Enjoy watching. Eliza stood at the stove, mechanically stirring the sauce that was to accompany the steak. An anniversary steak. A whole year. The words sounded in her head like a death sentence, not a celebration. The air in the kitchen was thick and heavy with the scent of garlic and rosemary, but instead of making her hungry, they made her feel slightly nauseous. All of this, the perfectly roasted meat, the expensive wine, the new black dress, felt like a tremendous, exhausting effort. An attempt to breathe life into something that had long since turned to dust. She caught herself acting out someone else's pre-written script. A trusted friend is preparing a romantic dinner to celebrate an anniversary. But inside, there was no thrill, no joyful anticipation, only a lingering, familiar weariness. She mentally replayed the last few months like a boring movie. Their conversations were reduced to trivial exchanges. Got some milk. Meeting tomorrow until evening. What should I watch? They slept in the same bed, their backs to each other. His kisses became quick and habitual, without sparkle. His laughter no longer evoked a smile in return. Miles's world was small, cozy, and safe. But for Eliza, it became a velvet-walled cage. It was comfortable, but stuffy. She couldn't breathe. She'd long caught herself thinking, there has to be a sign, some kind of end, some kind of final straw. She couldn't just up and leave without a compelling, fiery excuse. Miles wasn't a bad man. He hadn't cheated on her, he hadn't drunk, he hadn't raised a hand against her. His only fault was that he was ordinary. But her soul, it turned out, craved storms. She secretly dreamed of an earthquake that would shatter this fragile, boring world to its foundations, so that she wouldn't be the only one left to clear the rubble. As she put on the dress, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. There it is, the perfect picture, she thought without any joy. The dress fit perfectly, accentuating every line. But it didn't make her happy. It was just a costume for the last act of a play she no longer wanted to perform in. As she lit the candles on the table, her hands didn't tremble with excitement. It was a ritual, devoid of any magic. She looked at the two glasses, the two place settings, and saw not romance, but a symbol of her loneliness together. They were together, but she had never felt so alone as in these moments of quiet, predictable anticipation. And then, as if in response to her silent cry, the universe threw her the first clue, the first hint of the coming storm. Miles was late, already 40 minutes late. No call, no text, and that wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But tonight, on this evening that by all accounts should have been special, it sounded like a deafening slam of a door. It wasn't a loud, dramatic sign, but a quiet, humiliating whisper. You don't matter. This doesn't matter. Something broke in her soul. Not anger, not fury. At least, that would have been a living feeling. It was complete, final surrender. Emptiness. And in this emptiness, a strange, almost irrational decision was born. I need to send him a photo, she thought with cold calm. Let him see what our anniversary has become. A beautiful but lifeless picture. My anticipation, which is already over. She stood up and moved away from the table, capturing everything in the frame. Her figure in that perfect dress, that perfect dinner, that perfect setting. She took several shots. The smile on her lips was beautiful, but utterly lifeless, a mask concealing an abyss. She chose the most flawless and most false shot. Her fingers habitually brought up a chat with Miles, and at that very moment, as if fate itself had decided to intervene and give her that long-awaited sign, the door slammed in the entryway. She flinched, her finger trembled, and slid down a millimeter, tapping not the chat with the heart, but a random, unfamiliar number at the very bottom of the list. She didn't even glance at the screen. Her mind was already preoccupied with something else. Footsteps passed her by. Her heart sank, not from disappointment, but from a strange relief. A few more minutes of reprieve before the inevitable conversation. She pressed send and put the phone down. A mistake had been made. The photograph, full of her longing, disappointment, and silent farewell, flew not to the one who had caused these feelings, but to nowhere. Or rather, not to nowhere. It flew straight into the hands of a man for whom this picture was not the end, but the very beginning. The beginning of everything. And as Eliza snuffed out the candles, looking at the cooling, uneaten dinner, she felt not sadness, but a strange, aching anticipation. As if the door to her cage hadn't simply opened, it had been ripped out by a powerful, invisible explosion from somewhere beyond. The sign she'd been waiting for had arrived. Quiet, technological, in the form of an error message. And her life, dull and predictable, ended in that moment. She didn't know it yet, but her soul, hungry for change, had already begun to sing. Okay, let's be honest. The office was silent. The clicking of the keyboard, the hum of the servers, all of it remained behind the heavy door. A silence reigned here, a silence Kim Ji-hoon valued above all else. He sat at a massive dark wood desk, his posture upright, his movements economical and precise. He was reviewing a financial report. Numbers, sums, routes, names. This was his language, his territory. There was a phone lying nearby, not the business one, but a different one. A personal one. The number of people who had that number could be counted on the fingers of one hand. The phone vibrated, giving a short signal of a new message. Ji-hoon wasn't immediately distracted. He finished reading the line, made a note in the margin, and only then picked up the phone. His fingers had grown accustomed to the weight of the weapon, the texture of important documents. The phone was just a tool. He unlocked the screen, expecting to see a message from his mother or his trusted driver. Instead, there's a photograph. Unknown number. He looked at the picture. A girl, dark-skinned, in a black dress. She was standing at a set table. 2 candles, glasses, food. A standard setting for a romantic evening. But her face, her eyes, there was no joy in them, no anticipation. There was weariness, a deep, piercing weariness. A slight sadness at the corners of her lips. A gaze directed somewhere inward, not at the celebration. This was not a picture from a glossy magazine. This was the truth. Someone else's life, someone else's loneliness, accidentally found on his phone. Ji-hoon wasn't a sentimental person. He didn't believe in fate or love at first sight. He believed in facts, in logic, in expediency. But this photo had a different effect. It didn't evoke simple curiosity or sympathy. It provoked an immediate, visceral reaction, a clear, precise impulse in the brain. Find her. It was inexplicable. Illogical. Women in his life came and went. They were beautiful, smart, helpful, but they were part of the background. This girl in the photograph was different. Her image, her genuine weariness, momentarily pierced his armor. He saw something real in her, something that was missing from his own world, constructed according to the laws of force and calculation. He zoomed in. He wasn't examining her body, but the details of the background. The wallpaper, the furniture, the dishes on the table. It was all ordinary, cheap, a typical apartment in a residential area. He searched for any clue. The apartment number, the reflection in the glass, the name of the store on the packaging. Nothing, just her face. His finger pressed the call button. The connection was established almost instantly. Minho, Ji-hoon said. His voice was low and even, emotionless. I have the number. I need everything. The owner, the registered address, and the actual residential address. The place of work, the full dossier. Use all your resources. I'm waiting. He didn't explain why. There was no need. Minho was his right-hand man. He followed orders without question. "It will be done," a calm voice sounded on the phone. Ji-hoon put the phone down. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the photo again. All his tasks, all the meetings he'd planned for the day, instantly lost their meaning. An anomaly had appeared in his strictly ordered world, an unforeseen variable, and he was determined to investigate it, to take control of it. He didn't think about her having a man, a family, or her own life. These considerations were secondary. He saw her eyes. He saw the absence of happiness in them, and this fact was more important to him than any moral norms. He waited for 2 hours. He didn't seem outwardly impatient. He continued working, signing documents, answering emails. But part of his mind was occupied only with that. Waiting. The phone vibrated. "Minho." "Speak." "The owner of the number is Eliza Jackson," came the voice from the receiver. 25 years old, works as a graphic designer at the Vector Advertising Agency. Lives at 124 Central Avenue, apartment 38. Registered there. According to the mobile operator, the phone is located in the area of this address. It is not listed in any databases. Lives with Miles Roberts, 30 years old, a manager at a logistics company. The couple is not officially married. Ji-hoon listened without interrupting. All the information had formed a clear pattern in his head. "Do you have a photo?" he asked. "I have some from social media. I'm sending them." Several more photos of Eliza appeared on the phone screen. Smiling with friends at work, but Ji-hoon was looking for the same expression he saw in the first photo. And he found it. In some of the photos, apparently taken without unbeknownst to her, the smile did not reach her eyes. Her gaze was empty. "The apartment is named after her?" Ji-hoon asked. "No. It's on lease. The contract is in Robert's name." "Okay, that's it. Wait for further instructions." He hung up. His plan was set. He stood up and walked to the window. His city lay below. He knew what he had to do now. It was irrational, dangerous, stupid. But he couldn't stop. The impulse was too strong. He looked at the photograph again. "Eliza," he said mentally. His decision was final. He would find her, today. Kim Ji-hoon hung up the phone. The information had been received. Name, Eliza Jackson. Address, 124 Central Avenue, apartment 38. Employment, graphic designer. Lives with Miles Roberts. He walked to the window. His face remained impassive, but inside, everything froze in anticipation. The ordinary workday had lost its meaning. Now he had only one goal. He pressed the intercom button. "Lee, come in." 15 seconds later, his assistant entered the office. "Cancel all meetings for the rest of the day," Ji-hoon said. "Reschedule for tomorrow. Say there's an emergency." Lee nodded silently. "Made. Get the car ready. The one without license plates. I'll go myself." This was unusual. Ji-hoon rarely drove alone. But today, he didn't want any witnesses. This was his own business. When Elle left, Ji-hoon went to the safe. He pulled out a simple phone with no identification and a small flat case. He checked the contents of the case. Everything was there. He put it in his inside jacket pocket, a habit of being prepared for anything. He sat down at the computer. He opened a city map. 124 Central Avenue, a residential area, panel apartment buildings. He studied the entrances to the building, possible routes. His brain analyzed every detail, the parking lots, the courtyard, the lighting. 20 minutes later, he was in the underground garage. A dark, unmarked SUV was parked nearby. Lee silently handed over the keys. Ji-hoon nodded, got behind the wheel, and pulled out. It was evening. He drove calmly, obeying all the rules. His thoughts were focused on one point, apartment 38. He parked in the courtyard, not right next to the entrance, but at a distance. He turned off the engine and began to watch. People were coming and going. He waited. He needed to make sure Miles wasn't home. Miles' description got out, but the man didn't go to the entrance. He sat down on a bench near the entrance and took out his phone. It was clear he was in no hurry to go home. Perfect, Ji-hoon thought. He got out of the car. His tall, athletic figure in an expensive suit contrasted sharply with his surroundings. He approached the entrance. The door had a combination lock. He pressed several random combinations. On the third try, the door opened. He entered. He climbed the stairs to the third floor. He stopped in front of door number 38. He listened. Soft music, melancholy jazz, was coming from behind the door. He pressed the doorbell. Eliza was standing in the kitchen, unloading the dishwasher. She heard the doorbell ring and frowned. Miles? But he has the keys. Maybe the neighbor? Something with the meters again? She walked up to the door and peered through the peephole. A strange man stood behind the door. Tall, with perfect posture, wearing an impeccable dark suit. His face was serious, his features clear and strong. He didn't look like the neighbor. He didn't look like the courier. He was different. Who's there? She asked through the door. My name is Kim Ji-hoon, came a calm, low voice. I'm here about the photo. Photos? What photo? Eliza froze for a moment. Then it dawned on her. A mistake. The very photo she'd sent to the wrong number. Her heart started beating faster. Fear? No, more like a strange excitement. What did this man want? Why did he find her address? She slowly opened the door, leaving the chain behind. What photograph? She asked, looking at him through the crack. He stood motionless. His eyes met hers, dark, piercing. There was no threat in them. There was only absolute confidence. The very one you sent this evening, he said. I received it by mistake. He took out his phone and showed the screen. There was a photo of her, the one where she was standing at the table with dinner. I could have simply deleted it, he continued calmly. But I couldn't. I had to find you. Eliza looked at him, at his face, at his suit, at the way he held himself. This wasn't just a man. This was strength. The very strength she'd so keenly felt the absence of in her life. She slowly closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it again. Now they stood face to face. He was much taller than her. He looked like a man accustomed to making decisions, like a man who takes what he wants. Why? She asked quietly. Why were you looking for me? He didn't answer right away. His gaze slid over her face, her simple house clothes, and the apartment behind her. Because in your eyes in that photograph, I saw the same thing I feel every day, he finally said. Loneliness among people, boredom, a hunger for something real. The words hit home. She felt something tighten inside her, as if he'd read her deepest thoughts. I offer you a choice, Eliza, he said, calling her by name. Your life right now is a waiting game for something to change. I offer that change. He paused, letting her understand the meaning of his words. Pack your things. Only the essentials. You're moving in with me, now. It was madness, absolute, pure madness. To leave with a stranger? To leave everything? But there was no plea in his voice. It was a statement of fact. And instead of fear, instead of panic, she felt relief. The very sign she'd been waiting for, the earthquake that would destroy her old life. Okay, she said simply. I'll pack my things. She turned and walked into the bedroom. Her movements were calm, confident. She picked up a small duffel bag and began putting clothes, documents, and cosmetics in it. Her mind was clear, no doubt. He waited in the living room, taking in her modest abode. His gaze lingered on the photographs on the shelf, her and Mile, smiling. But his expression didn't change. 10 minutes later, she came out with a bag. I'm ready. He nodded and turned to leave. She followed him, closing the door to her old life behind her. They walked down the stairs and out into the courtyard. He led her to a dark SUV and opened the front passenger door. She got in. The car's interior was luxurious. Everything smelled of leather and some kind of expensive wood. He got behind the wheel and started the engine. Before driving off, he turned to face her. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. "To go off into the unknown with a stranger?" Eliza looked at him, at his strong hands on the wheel, at his profile. "No," she answered honestly. "I was afraid to stay there. That was much scarier." He nodded again, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Then he pulled away, and they pulled out of the driveway, leaving her past behind. The car pulled smoothly out of the driveway of her old house. Eliza looked out the side window, seeing the flickering lights of streetlights, the familiar outlines of panel apartment buildings, the playground where she sometimes sat in the evenings. But now it seemed like the scenery for someone else's play, one in which she no longer played a part. The silence in the car was intense, but it wasn't awkward. It was rich, thick, as if they both understood the profound significance of this moment. Ji-hoon drove with concentration, his hands firmly on the wheel. He didn't look at her, giving her time and space to process what was happening. And it was in this silence that the simple, inescapable truth finally dawned on Eliza. She had just walked away from her old life forever. And she needed to seal it. Make sure there was no turning back. She pulled her phone out of her jeans pocket. The screen lit up brightly in the dim light of the car. It showed several missed calls from Miles, and one message. "Hey, I'll be right there. Traffic's terrible." She opened a chat with him. His smiling photo was her avatar. Just an hour ago, this image had evoked a familiar, albeit faded, warmth. Now it was just a picture. Like a photograph of a stranger from the past, she began typing. Her fingers didn't tremble. Inside, there was only cold, crystalline clarity. "Miles, I'm leaving. Don't look for me. Don't call. It's over." She paused, looking at what she had written. It was too cruel, too impersonal. He didn't deserve this. He was a good guy. He just wasn't the one for her. She took a deep breath and began writing again, this time in more detail, pouring out all the truth she had been storing up for months. "Miles, what I'm about to say will sound cruel, but it's the truth. I'm leaving. Today, now. Forever. I know it's a shock, and I'm sorry it all happened this way, without talking. But if we had talked, you would have tried to talk me out of it, and I might have agreed to stay. And I can't stay any longer. You're a wonderful person, kind, reliable, stable. But over this year, I've realized that my soul needs more than just stability and reliability. It needs storms. It needs madness. I felt cramped, Miles, cramped in our predictable life, where every day is like the last. I was dying of boredom and silence, and you didn't notice. And I couldn't find the words to explain it to you. Tonight, our anniversary, was the last straw. You were late without even warning. And I sat at that set table and realized it was the perfect metaphor for our relationship. A beautiful but empty picture, with nothing behind it. And fate, it seems, agreed with me. I sent you that photo to the wrong number. Another man received it, and he came. He found me. And when I saw him, I knew. Here it is. That very sign, that very earthquake I was waiting for. I can't explain it logically. This feeling. I'm leaving with him. I don't know what awaits me ahead. But I know that staying there, in that life, is scarier for me than leaving with a stranger into the unknown. Forgive me. Please. I don't want you to suffer. Find yourself a girl who will appreciate your calm love, who will want that very stability. That girl is not me. I'm deleting the number. Don't try to find me. I wish you all the best. Sincerely. Goodbye. Eliza. She reread the text. It was the truth. The whole truth, unvarnished. Bitter, uncomfortable, but true. She pressed send. Then she went into her phone settings, found his number, and pressed block caller. Then she deleted him from her contacts. She took out the SIM card, looked at it for a second, and then rolled down the window and tossed it out the open window. The tiny piece of plastic vanished into the darkness, just like her past life. She rolled down the window and leaned back in the leather seat, closing her eyes. She felt not guilt, but an incredible, all-consuming relief. As if a weight she'd been carrying for so long that she'd stopped noticing its weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Ji-hoon asked quietly. His voice expressed neither curiosity nor approval, simply a statement. "Done," she replied, opening her eyes and looking at his profile, illuminated by the dashboard. "I'm completely here now." Miles climbed the stairs to the third floor, struggling to carry a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a bottle of wine he'd bought to make up for his lateness in the other. He felt a little guilty, but he was sure the celebratory dinner would make up for it. "I'll say I was delayed by an urgent report," he thought as he inserted his key into the lock. The door wasn't locked. Strange, flashed through his mind. Eliza is always so afraid, always locking herself in. A slight sense of surprise crossed his mind, but he brushed it aside. "Eliza, I'm home. Sorry I'm late," he began, entering the hallway. His voice faded into silence. The apartment was immersed in semi-darkness, the only light on in the kitchen. The air was still. He walked into the living room and saw the table. It was set, 2 plates. On them lay steaks that looked shriveled and cold. The potatoes were covered with a wrinkled crust. 2 candles had burned down to the ground, and strands of hardened wax hung from the candlesticks. The whole scene was motionless and silent. She must have been very upset, he thought with annoyance. Perhaps she went to see a friend. He took out his phone to call her and apologize. The call went through, but didn't connect. The answering machine said, "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." The battery must have died, he guessed, or there's no signal on the subway. He sent a message. "Hey, I'm home. Where are you? Is everything okay? Sorry I'm late." He put the phone on the table and went into the bedroom to change. Everything was clean. His gaze slid around the room and stopped at her dresser. Usually, her earrings and perfume bottles were on it. Now, the surface was bare. A slight unease touched him. He went to the closet and opened it. His shirts and suits were hanging in their places, but her half was empty. All her dresses and jeans were gone. Not a single hanger remained. A cold, unpleasant confusion gripped him. He peered into the bathroom. Her toothbrush and cosmetics were gone. Her towels were off the hook. The shelf in the hallway, where her sneakers and gym bag always stood, was also empty. He returned to the living room and tried calling again. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." He wrote another message. "I can't get through to you. Where are you? What happened? Is everything okay?" He stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the motionless dinner. Realization began to slowly creep up on him, but he desperately resisted. No, it couldn't be. She couldn't just up and leave. Maybe something had happened to her. Maybe she'd been taken to the hospital. But then someone would have called him. And her things. Why would she take all her things? He sat down and stared at his phone. He updated the app, rebooted the phone, tried calling from a different number. The result was the same, silence. His chat messages were wasted, marked with a single gray check mark, meaning they hadn't even been delivered. He didn't receive her long goodbye message. It never reached him, lost in the digital void after she discarded the SIM card. For him, there was no explanation. There was no truth. There was only the shocking, silent fact. Her things were gone, and she herself had become completely unreachable. He sat in complete silence, staring at the screen, trying to understand what had happened. But there was no answer. There was only a growing, oppressive emptiness and a complete misunderstanding that made his heart clench. He was left alone in a silence he couldn't break, with a question he couldn't answer. They drove out of town. The lights of the metropolis were left behind, replaced by the dark canvas of a country highway, demarcated only by the glow of headlights and the occasional lights of a roadside cafe. "Aren't you scared?" Ji-hoon asked again, breaking the silence. This time, his question sounded different, not like a test, but like genuine curiosity. You don't know anything about me. You dropped everything at the first word of a stranger. Eliza turned to face him in her seat, tucking her legs under her. Her eyes glittered in the dim light. You know what was scary? She said quietly. It was scary waking up every morning and knowing exactly how my day would go, down to the minute. It was scary looking at Miles and realizing that our conversations were over, and the future seemed like a long, straight, boring road to nowhere. It was scary feeling myself slowly fading, becoming a shadow of myself. And this? She gestured at the dark highway ahead of them. This isn't scary. This is freedom. He listened without interrupting. I didn't love him that much, she admitted with stunning frankness. I loved the idea of a relationship, the comfort, the familiarity. And when I realized it was a trap, it was too late to change anything. The usual way. You appeared as a way out, like the door I'd been looking for in a blank wall. And you're just my type. Strong, decisive, direct. You don't have that everyday fussy insecurity. He gave a short laugh, a soft sound barely audible over the noise of the engine. I'm surprised, he admitted. I expected anything. Tears, hysterics, attempts to escape, calls to the police, but not this clarity. I'm surprised myself, Eliza smiled. But this is the best thing I've ever done in my life. I feel it in every cell of my body. I didn't mean to barge into your life so rudely, he said after a pause. His voice grew more serious. I knew you had a boyfriend, that those photos weren't for me. I don't even know what motivated me. Simple impudence? But something was stronger than common sense. Something made me get in the car and drive to you. And now I understand. It was the right decision. I don't regret a thing. Neither do I, she whispered. And I don't need fleeting relationships, Eliza, he continued, looking straight at the road. I have enough fleeting things in my life. I liked you. From the first glance, from that very photograph. In your eyes, I saw what I thought only I had. Coldness and a thirst for something real. My intentions are sincere. This confession, made in such an even, confident tone, meant more to her than any vows spoken with passion. There was truth in his words. The conversation flowed easily and naturally. They talked about trivial matters, about music, about books, about what they saw outside the window. Time lost its hold on them. The hours on the road flew by in an instant. She felt no fatigue, only a growing excitement, a sense of anticipation. They turned off the highway onto a private road, guarded by a discreet barrier with a camera. The road wound through a dark forest, and then the view opened up. A huge, modern, high-tech house with panoramic windows pouring warm light. It stood on a ledge, and through the glass, one could see the dark expanse of a lake or river. Ji-hoon stopped the car in front of the front entrance. We've arrived. This is my home. Now it's yours. They got out of the car. The night air was clean and cool, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. He took her bag and placed his hand on her back, leading her to the heavy oak door. At that moment, her phone vibrated in her jeans pocket. A new message. She froze for a moment. She had thrown away the SIM card, after all. But the phone, connected to the Wi-Fi network at home, received the message she'd sent earlier. She pulled it out. It was from Miles. That same desperate one. I can't reach you. Where are you? What happened? Are you okay? I'm worried it. I'm sure your phone was stolen, and it's not true. I'll find you and save you. Ji-hoon looked at her without impatience. He was giving her a choice, a final choice. Eliza looked at the message, then at his face, illuminated by the light from the house, at his calm, confident eyes. She remembered the empty half of the closet, the cold dinner, her melancholy. She opened the reply to the message and began typing. Short and final. Miles, it's true, I'm safe, and I've made my decision. This is the end of our relationship. I'm sorry it happened. I don't want to see you again. I wish you find true love. Goodbye. She sent the message and then turned off her phone completely. She no longer wanted to be connected to that world. Jihoon asked quietly. Eliza replied and put the phone in her pocket. He opened the door for her. Warm air, scented with wood and something faintly floral, greeted them. Inside was a spacious hall with a high ceiling, minimalist furniture, and paintings on the walls. Welcome home, Eliza, he said, and for the first time there was something more to his voice than just confidence. A quiet, deep satisfaction. She crossed the threshold, and the door closed behind her, finally separating her past and future. She didn't look back. A new life lay ahead, full of secrets, dangers, and promises. And she was ready for it. Finally. Jihoon's house were like a fairy tale. Eliza lived in the kind of luxury she'd only seen in movies. She woke to a view of the lake from her bedroom's panoramic window. A discreet but efficient maid served her. Jihoon was attentive, generous, and surprisingly normal. They spent their evenings chatting, and he talked about his business, a legitimate one, importing electronics and luxury goods. He seemed passionate about his work, a smart and collected entrepreneur. He never showed aggression or raised his voice. He took her to restaurants, bought her clothes, listened to her. Eliza began to relax. She thought she'd found her ideal, a strong but fair man who would tear her away from her dreary reality. She suppressed the sense of foreboding that sometimes stirred deep within, attributing it to the shock of the sudden change of scenery. One evening, Jihoon said he had an urgent late-night video conference with partners in Asia. Don't wait for me, go to bed, he said, gently ruffling her hair. Everything will be in my office. That night, Eliza woke up thirsty. After going down to the kitchen and drinking some water, she heard from behind the office door, not the calm voices of the meeting, but Jihoon's angry, muffled cry. She had never heard such a tone from him before. It was an icy, furious voice that sent shivers down her spine. She couldn't help but listen, moving closer. I said the debt must be repaid before dawn, Jihoon hissed. Can't afford it? You'll work it off. Hand over your share of the port warehouses. Yes, I heard you right. This isn't up for discussion. No, Lee won't come. The accountants will deal with you. And if they come, you won't care which warehouses we're talking about. Understood? Eliza froze, pressed against the wall, her heart pounding. Accountants. It sounded so innocuous, but in the context of his voice, the word took on an ominous, deadly connotation. Jihoon stood there. His face was a mask of cold fury, but upon seeing her, it instantly changed. The anger melted, replaced by wary politeness. Eliza, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? I was thirsty, she whispered, feeling her hands trembling. He approached her, his gaze heavy and searching. He placed his hand on her forehead. You're shaking all over. You probably have a cold. Come on, I'll put you to bed. There was no longer the tenderness in his touch. It was commanding, controlling. He walked her to the bedroom and tucked her into bed like a child. But before leaving, he paused at the door. And Eliza, my office, and my conversations are best left alone, for your own peace of mind. Good night. The door closed. Eliza lay in the darkness, panic gripping her. Accountants! Until dawn. That voice. It wasn't the man she knew. It was someone else. Someone dangerous. The next morning, Jihoon was the same as always. Calm, attentive, smiling. He pretended nothing had happened, but the illusion was shattered. Eliza began to notice details she hadn't noticed before. His two assistants were always present in the house. Lee and another, a silent man with a blank stare. They didn't look like office workers. Their movements were too precise, their posture too upright. They were Jihoon's shadow, his silent, invisible weapon. One day, while scrolling through the news on her tablet, she came across a short article about a well-known nightclub chain owner, Jang Min-sok, voluntarily transferring all his assets to Ji-hoon's holding company and leaving the country for health reasons. The article presented it as a successful business deal, but Eliza remembered that night. Jang Min-sok's name flashed through that angry monologue. She decided on a desperate step. While Ji-hoon was out of town, she approached his office again. The door, oddly enough, was unlocked. Apparently, he was so confident in his authority that he didn't expect disobedience. She walked inside. The office was immaculately clean. No papers, nothing extra. She approached the computer. It was password protected. Desperate, she began carefully opening the desk drawers. In one of them, under a folder with legal documents, she found a simple smartphone. An old model. Nothing special. Intuition told her to turn it on. The phone asked for a PIN. Desperately, she entered several random combinations, and on the fourth try, her birthday, the phone unlocked. Her heart sank. It was both flattering and terrifying. There was nothing on her phone except a messenger app with a single chat. The contact was labeled Accounting. With bated breath, she opened it. The last message was sent this morning. Brief summary. The matter with Min-seok is closed. Assets have been transferred. No traces. The message above reads, find all information on Eliza Jackson, school, university, ex-girlfriends, medical records, credit history, everything. And the very first message in the chat history, sent that very night she mistakenly sent the photo, was from Ji-hoon. I found something special. Maybe it's the weakness I never had. I have to be careful, but I can't let it slip away. Eliza recoiled from the phone as if it were a hot iron. All this time, he hadn't simply fallen in love. He had seen her as a weakness, an object. He had been conducting total surveillance on her from the very first day. He knew everything about her. Her breakup with Miles hadn't been a surprise to him. It had been the intended outcome, brought about by his arrival in her life as a savior. She was not the woman he loved. She was his greatest risk and his most valuable trophy. At that moment, the door to the office quietly opened. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway. His face was impassive, but that same dangerous spark she'd seen that night burned in his eyes. His gaze moved from her to the phone in her hand. I warned you, Eliza, he said quietly. Some doors are best left unopened. Now she was trapped. Not in a boring cage, but in a real, golden, and deadly one. And her master had just removed his mask. Ji-hoon entered the office and closed the door. The lock clicked. He didn't look angry. He looked businesslike. The same look he had when he studied the reports. He walked up to the bar and poured himself some water. He didn't offer her any. You broke the rule, he said calmly. I told you not to interfere in my business. You did. Eliza stood leaning against the table. Her insides were frozen solid. She remained silent. The situation has changed now, he continued. You know too much. Too much for a guest. Too much for the woman you love. Now you have two paths. He put down the glass and looked at her. First, you're becoming part of my operation. Not an ornament, not a weakness, a tool. You're smart, resourceful. I've seen it. You'll work for me. You'll get a cut. But there will be no freedom. Never. Second, you try to resist or escape. In that case, he pulled her old phone out of his pocket, the one she'd left behind in her past life. He turned it on and opened the gallery. There were photos of her mother, her younger sister, her friends. In that case, accidents will happen to your loved ones, one after another. I'm not threatening. I'm informing. It's a system of checks and balances. Eliza listened, her world narrowing to the size of this office, to this man, to two paths, both leading to different kinds of prison. Why don't you just get rid of me? She asked quietly. It would be easier. Because dead people are expenses and unnecessary problems, he answered without hesitation. And the living, if they are properly motivated, are an asset. You proved you can be an asset. Tonight, you didn't panic. You acted. That's valuable. He came close to her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical pressure. The choice is yours. But it's not a choice you can put off. The answer is now. Eliza looked at the phone in his hand, at the picture of her and her sister laughing. She was 17. She had promised then to always protect her. She looked up at Jihoon. The icy calm within her was replaced by a cold, merciless clarity. Running now would mean signing their death warrant. Staying would mean fighting on his turf. But every turf has its weak points. "I'm staying," she said. Her voice was even and firm. "But on my terms." He raised an eyebrow slightly, curious. "Which ones?" "I won't be a tool. I'll be a partner. Junior, if you like. But with voting rights. I'll study your business. All of it. And you'll pay me. Not handouts for dresses, but a real percentage. Otherwise, I'll have no incentive except fear. And fear is an unreliable motivator. Sooner or later, it makes people do stupid things." Jihoon looked at her long and hard. Something akin to respect flickered in his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game." "You started it," she retorted. "You wanted power at your side. You got it, but power demands respect, not just control." He nodded slowly. "Okay, partner. On probation. One wrong move." He glanced at the phone. "I get it." She cut him off. He turned and walked toward the exit. He stopped at the door. "Starting today, your movements will be accompanied by Elle or someone from the team. For your own safety, of course. Your new life, Eliza, has officially begun. Congratulations." He left. Eliza was left alone. She exhaled slowly. A shiver finally ran down her spine. Not from fear, from adrenaline. She looked at the armored window, at her reflection. She was in a golden cage, but now she had a key. Not to open the door, but to sharpen the bars from the inside. She had to study every latch, every weakness of her jailer. His business, his connections, his fears. She turned and sat down at his computer. He'd changed the password, of course, but this was the first of many fortresses she would have to conquer. She was no longer a miserable girl running away from boredom. She was a hostage, having made a deal with the devil. And she was determined to outsmart him. Even if it took years, she had them now, her whole life. Jihoon's conditions had passed, replaced by a sluggish, monotonous reality. Now her life was scheduled hour by hour. Morning, breakfast under Lee's supervision. Afternoon, reviewing documents under the guise of assistance in a legitimate business. Evening, dinner with Jihoon, during which he watched her appraisingly. One afternoon, while sorting through her electric bills, she came across a receipt from the flower shop. Dated that very day, their anniversary. Miles had ordered a bouquet. He wasn't just late, he was on his way with flowers. Eliza put the folder down and walked over to the huge window. It was raining. The glass was cold. She looked out at the perfectly manicured lawn, the wet tiles by the pool, the high fence topped with barbed wire. Everything here was perfect, sterile, and soulless. And she suddenly remembered her old balcony with a painful clarity. Small, with peeling paint, with a box where she'd tried to grow petunias. She remembered how she and Miles would sit there on summer evenings, drinking cheap wine and laughing at silly things. Was she bored? Yes, but it was a boredom filled with warmth and safety. Now her life was the complete opposite of boredom. Every day was a challenge. Every glance from Jihoon was a test. She lived in constant tension, like a string. And this interesting life turned out to be unbearable. She used to complain about predictability. Now she'd give anything for one predictable, boring evening, for the chance to simply relax, without worrying about what she might say being misinterpreted, for the chance to go out alone, just to buy a coffee, without the constant gaze of a bodyguard. She missed her job, her irritating but so lively colleagues, her bosses grumbling. the feeling of accomplishing a project. Now her job consisted of being a hostage with a pretty label partner. 7:00 a.m. Eliza wakes up alone in her king-size bed. Ji-hoon's bed on the other side is untouched. He didn't come in last night. 8:30. She comes down for breakfast. There's a single-place setting on the table. The maid says, "Mr. Kim has already left. He said not to expect him for dinner." 12:00 p.m. She tries to enter the garden. Lee, her bodyguard, appears immediately. "Security protocol, I will accompany you." She strolls along the perfect paths under his unwavering gaze. 3:00 p.m. She decides to watch a movie in the home theater. She notices that all the films are action movies and thrillers. Her favorite romantic comedies are missing. Her tastes have been ignored. 5:00 p.m. A personal shopper arrives with evening dresses. Ji-hoon sent a message. "Pick out something for the charity event on Friday. I'll pick you up at 8. No hi, no, how are you? Just an order." 7:00 p.m. She's dining alone. The chef serves an exquisite dish. It's impeccable, but tasteless. Like everything else here. 9:00 p.m. She calls Ji-hoon. He hangs up. A minute later, a text comes. "In a meeting, what happened?" She writes, "Missed you." No answer. 11:00 p.m. He returns. He walks into the office without looking at her. An hour later, he enters the bedroom, smelling of whiskey and expensive tobacco. "Are you awake?" he asks, undoing his tie. Her expectation of a tender "How was your day?" vanishes into thin air. 11:30 p.m. He's already asleep. She lies and stares at the ceiling. Her exciting life has been reduced to a schedule of his absences and rare businesslike appearances. She thinks of those boring evenings with Miles, when they could talk for 3 hours about nothing, and everything seemed important to her. Here, everything was important except her. Luxury became the backdrop for the most sophisticated solitude. One night, she woke up to what she thought was a bird calling outside her window. She listened. There was silence. Absolute silence. No sound of cars, no neighbors, no familiar city noise. This silence was deafening. It was louder than any noise. She wrapped herself in a blanket and realized she was crying. Quietly, without sobs. She wasn't crying out of fear of Ji-hoon. She was crying for the boring, simple life she'd destroyed. She'd wanted change so much that she'd failed to see what a treasure she possessed. Now her life was like an expensive, perfectly crafted movie, with beautiful sets and talented actors, but she hadn't written the script. And leaving this movie theater was impossible. 8:15. To her surprise, Ji-hoon was sitting at the breakfast table. He was looking through documents on his tablet, a cup of black coffee next to him. Eliza sat down across from him hopefully. She wanted to tell him she hadn't slept well, to share some trivial detail. "Good morning," she said. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Morning." Elle entered the dining room with a phone in his hand. Ji-hoon raised his hand, signaling that it was okay to speak in front of her. "There's a problem with the delivery at the port," Lee reported briefly. "We need your solution." Ji-hoon began dictating instructions, completely oblivious to her presence. He talked about money, inconvenient people, and urgent transfers. Eliza sat and ate her omelet in silence. It was perfect, but she felt like she was chewing cotton wool. She watched him talk animatedly to his assistant, his face expressive, his eyes sparkling. She rarely saw him like this. He was never like this with her. When Elle left, there was a brief pause. She plucked up her courage. "Ji-hoon, when are we finally going to spend time together? Just like that, not at some event." He slowly looked up at her, his expression distant, almost bored. "Eliza, you knew perfectly well what kind of person you were getting yourself into when you accepted my offer," he said in a flat, emotionless tone. "My time is worth money, a lot of it. I don't have it to spare." He took a sip of coffee and picked up the tablet again, clearly ending the conversation. "Don't complicate things. You got everything you wanted. A new life, luxury, security. Don't start creating problems where there aren't any. He stood up without even finishing his coffee. I won't be back for dinner. And he left, leaving her alone in the vast, quiet dining room. She sat and stared at his empty cup. In that moment, she finally understood. She wasn't his beloved. She was just another asset in his portfolio, expensive, but not requiring much attention as long as she functioned properly. Evening came. She looked at the sleeping man. Ji-hoon. He was handsome, strong, powerful, and he was her jailer. And her old, boring boyfriend, who forgot to take out the trash but always remembered that she liked strawberry ice cream, was free. And maybe happy. The desire to rewind everything was so intense that her heart physically ached. But it was impossible. The only way was forward. Through this beautiful, luxurious, and hopelessly lonely life she had chosen for herself, succumbing to a momentary impulse and illusion. One morning, Eliza came down for breakfast. Ji-hoon was already sitting at the table, scrolling through the news on his tablet. He nodded at her without looking up from the screen. Everything was going according to the usual, well-practiced script. "We're getting a new chef today," he remarked indifferently. "The previous one couldn't handle it. Lee's found a replacement." Eliza merely nodded, uninterested. The staff changed frequently. Ji-hoon was demanding of everything around him. An hour later, she peered in as she passed the kitchen. A new man stood at the stove. Tall, in a white uniform, his back to her. He worked quickly and confidently, but there was something achingly familiar in his posture, in the way he leaned over the saucepan. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. It can't be! At that moment, he turned to grab some spices from the shelf. Their eyes met for a second. It was Miles. He looked older, focused. There was no surprise in his eyes. There was only a quick, barely perceptible warning glance. "Be quiet." She walked past, her expression unchanged, but inside, everything inside her was twisted. How? Why? How could he pull this off? Everyone at Ji-hoon's gets tested. At lunch, he served the dish himself. As he placed the plate in front of her, his finger tapped the edge twice, unnoticed by anyone else. Then, just as calmly, he placed the plate in front of Ji-hoon. Later, in her room, she looked at her plate. Beneath the decorative greenery, at the very edge, lay a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. "Trust me. I know everything. Wait for a sign. I'll pull you out." That was it. No name, no signature. But she knew who it was. Miles. Her boring, predictable Miles, who, it turned out, had managed to bypass the security system of one of the most dangerous men in the city and get a job in his kitchen to save her. For the first time in weeks, a genuine, unforced smile appeared on her lips. It wasn't just joy, it was shock. For so many years, she'd considered him ordinary, incapable of adventure. And yet he'd gone to such lengths for her, risking everything. That evening, while he was cleaning the kitchen, she found an excuse to stop by for water. Lee, as always, was nearby. "The dish was wonderful," she told him evenly, looking away. "Especially the sauce. It had that very unexpected twist." Miles continued washing the dishes without raising his head. "Thank you, ma'am. The secret is in timing. Add an ingredient too early and everything will be ruined. Too late, and the dish cannot be saved. You need patience." Their eyes met again for a split second. He wasn't talking about the sauce. He was giving her instructions. "Wait. Be patient." "I understand," Eliza said quietly. "I'll be waiting for your next culinary experiment." She left the kitchen, feeling a long-forgotten feeling surge within her, hope. Now she had an accomplice. Not some abstract chance, but a living person who knew her and apparently loved her far more than she thought. Ji-hoon, lost in his thoughts, suspected nothing. To him, the new chef was just another faceless servant who cooked well. His system had failed in the most unexpected place. He couldn't imagine that his worthless ex-boyfriend was capable of such ingenuity and courage. Eliza now looked at Miles differently. He wasn't boring, he was reliable. And this reliability, it turned out, was far more valuable than all the thrills that had brought her to this gilded cage. Now she had a goal: to wait for his sign. And this time, not to make a mistake. Ji-hoon was having problems. A large shipment of electronics from Vietnam was detained at the port. Questions arose at customs, and the bribed officials suddenly became intractable. This required his personal attention: calls, meetings, negotiations. He was seen in the mansion less and less. The security system worked like clockwork, but the owner himself had let down his guard, plunging into crisis. He was confident Eliza was under control. She was quiet, studying documents, making no sudden movements. His system of checks and balances, he believed, was working flawlessly. Miles took advantage of this. As a cook, he had access to the grocery delivery schedule. He noticed that fresh fish was delivered from Norway once a week in large insulated containers. These containers were loaded into the basement, and the empty ones were taken back the next day. One day, when Eliza went into the kitchen under the pretext of getting a drink of water, Miles, wiping the countertop, quickly whispered without looking at her, "Tomorrow, in the morning. A large gray fish container. It will have a compartment for ice. It's hollow. Inside is a change of clothes, a wig, a passport, and money. At 10:15, the guards change, and one person remains at the gate for 5 minutes. The container will be removed at 10:20. Eliza almost dropped her glass. The plan was insanely simple and therefore brilliant. Who would look for a fugitive in an empty, stinking fish container? Security checked everything at the entrance, but at the exit, they only briefly scanned the invoices. "How did you—" she began. "I was a logistician, remember?" He smiled slightly at the corner of his lips. "I know how all the transportation systems in this city work, and how holes form in them. Trust me." Eliza had been on edge all evening. This was her only chance. She followed Miles's instructions. She wore dark, non-marking sweatpants and a t-shirt that wouldn't stand out in the city. She left all the jewelry Ji-hoon had given her in the jewelry box. They were part of the life she was fleeing. She hid under her clothes only the very same package that he gave her later: a new passport in a different name, a wad of money, and a simple chat phone. She behaved as usual in the morning. She ate breakfast and pretended to go to the library to work on documents. At 10:10, at a signal from Miles, who loudly asked one of the guards if he wanted coffee, she slipped out of the library and quickly headed toward the service exit leading to the basement. Her heart was pounding, as if it wanted to leap out of her chest. Every step echoed in her ears like a roar. She knew there were cameras everywhere, but Miles had promised that the recording system in this area would be undergoing brief maintenance during that time. Another loophole he'd found in the security schedule. The basement smelled of fish and chlorine. She saw the same large gray container. The lid of the ice compartment was slightly ajar. No one was nearby. She looked back at the luxurious basement, this beautiful prison, for the last time. There was not a drop of regret. She climbed inside. The cramped, dark, and cold compartment contained 2 bags. One held a simple jacket, a cap, and sunglasses. The other, a bottle of water and an energy bar. Miles had thought of everything. She closed the lid from the inside. Complete darkness fell. A few minutes later, she felt the container begin to move. She was being transported to freedom. All that remained was to pass through the gates. Voices were heard outside. The container stopped. "Container removal document," said a gruff voice. It was the guard at the gate. Eliza froze, afraid to breathe. Her fate now depended on a simple piece of paper, and whether the guard would be willing to look inside what he thought was an empty container. Kim Ji-hoon wanted to check on Eliza. He hadn't had a minute all day. First, an urgent call from the port. Problems with the cargo. Then, a worried accomplice demanding an urgent meeting. Then, problems with the money transfer. He called Li. "How is Eliza?" "Everything is calm. She's in the library," the guard reported briefly. Ji-hoon nodded. He'd planned to stop by after talking with the accountant, but the conversation dragged on. Then came a message that one of the couriers had been detained. He needed to resolve the issue immediately. "Elle again. Is everything okay?" he asked, leafing through the documents. "Absolutely," she reads. Ji-hoon hung up with relief. Things were bad, but at least there was order here. He decided he'd drop by to see her that evening. Give her a hug. Make sure she was with him. But that evening, a new crisis arose. The police launched a surprise raid on his warehouses. They had to urgently mobilize all their personnel and recall their lawyers. He was so absorbed in putting out fire after fire that he didn't even notice the day fly by. He was interrupted every 5 minutes. Finally, late at night, things calmed down a bit. He got into the car and drove to the mansion. It was already past midnight. "She's probably asleep," he thought. "I won't wake her. I'll check in the morning." In the morning, he was awakened by another emergency call. The problems had returned. He left without even entering her bedroom. Meanwhile, Eliza was already preparing to escape. While he was fighting for his empire, his greatest treasure was slipping away. And all because he couldn't find 5 minutes to just walk up to her and really well look at her. Miles hated this mansion. Every shiny meter, every expensive trinket. He hated the smell of expensive polish and absolute power that hung in the air. But most of all, he hated Ji-hoon himself, the cold, self-assured man who, with his mere appearance, had taken everything from him. But when he thought about Eliza, the hatred receded. Yes, she had betrayed him, abandoned him without a word, like an unwanted object. This pain burned inside him. But when he saw her in this house, not happy, but frightened and trapped, like a bird in a golden cage, the anger towards her went away. He understood. She hadn't escaped to happiness. She had escaped boredom and ended up in hell. And he still loved her. Stupidly, irrationally. But he loved her. So he turned a blind eye to her betrayal. His goal now was one: to get her out of here. Miles used his logistics background to identify weaknesses in Ji-hoon's system. He noticed that security was slacking off during the morning shift at 10:15, and that empty containers were less thoroughly inspected. His plan was simple and daring. Hide Eliza in a container for empty containers. He arranged for the driver to be bribed, disguised as a prank, and prepared false documents. The container rumbled down the road. Eliza held her breath, listening to every sound outside. Then the car stopped. Voices, the muffled words of the driver, and the guard at the exit. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. Then, the screeching of the barrier, and the car moved off again, picking up speed. They were outside the gate. Half an hour later, the container opened. Blinding daylight hit her eyes. Miles stood against the sky. He silently extended his hand, helping her out. They were in an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. A nondescript old car was parked nearby. "Quickly!" "Dee!" was all Ananya said. They climbed into the car in silence and drove off. Miles chose country roads over highways. He knew the first few hours were the most crucial. They changed cars twice, using pre-prepared keys left in designated locations. By evening, they were already hundreds of kilometers from the city of Ji-hoon. They rented a room in a cheap motel by the sea. They barely spoke the first night. They simply slept holding hands, as if afraid it was a dream. The next morning, Eliza finally exhaled. She looked out the window of her new, modest room at the sea. No luxury, no security, just freedom. "How did you manage all this?" she asked quietly. Miles shrugged. "I was a good logistician, and I loved you. That was enough." He didn't ask her about Ji-hoon. He didn't reproach her. He understood that she had already punished herself. They sold a few pieces of jewelry that Eliza, arts, on Miles's advice, had nevertheless taken with her as startup capital. With the money, they bought a small apartment in a quiet seaside town. Miles got a job at a local logistics company. Eliza, using her design skills, began taking orders online. Their life began anew. It was simple, sometimes difficult, but completely theirs. They chose furniture together at the flea market, cooked dinner together in the tiny kitchen, and laughed at their failures together. One day, months later, Eliza saw a short report on the news. Kim Ji-hoon had been arrested on charges of corruption and money laundering. His empire had collapsed. She turned off the TV and looked out the window. It was raining outside. Miles was reading on the couch. Sometime later, late in the evening, they were sitting on their balcony, drinking evening tea and looking out at the sea. It was quiet and peaceful. Eliza suddenly laughed softly. "Remember that night?" she said, looking at the sunset. "Our anniversary. I was so angry that you were late. I set the table, put on a dress, and then I sent that stupid photo to the wrong person." Miles nodded. He remembered. "I thought it was the biggest mistake of my life," she continued, her voice growing serious. "It turned out to be the best thing I ever did. Because that mistake ultimately brought you to me, brought you back to me." She turned to him, and her eyes were filled with such tenderness and confidence that it took his breath away. "That wrong number, that accident, it showed me the difference. One man, having received my photo, decided I was now his property. Another, having learned I was in trouble, forged documents, infiltrated the enemy's lair, and pulled me out in a fish container." She laughed softly again, but there were tears of relief in her laughter. "You risked everything for me, after I abandoned you." She took his hand in hers and squeezed it tightly. "I don't need anyone else, Miles. Never. You proved your worth once. Not with pretty words, but with actions. You are my man, period." He didn't say anything. He simply hugged her. He didn't need words. Everything was clear as is. That evening, that mistake, all that horror, all of it had brought them here, to this balcony, to this silence, to this life. And they both knew it was forever. After that, Eliza put her hand on his arm. "You know what I'm thinking?" she said. "I think we're finally living. Not playing at life, just living." Miles smiled. He wasn't the boring guy anymore. He was reliable. And it turned out that was the most interesting and valuable quality in the world. "Me too," he replied. "And you know what? I like this boring thing much better." They didn't become rich. They didn't have luxury. But they did have something money can't buy: peace of mind. They could argue over trivial matters without fear of disaster. They could make plans for the future, maybe open their own small cafe or just go on vacation to the mountains. Their life was like that sea outside their window, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but always free. They'd been through thick and thin to understand a simple thing. True happiness isn't about thrills. It's about having someone to share a silent breakfast with, and that brings warmth and peace. And they found it, together. The life of Mafia boss Kim Ji-hoon quickly fell apart. First, his business failed. Then he was arrested. The trial was short. He received a long sentence. All his wealth and power disappeared. While in prison, he thought a lot. And his biggest regret wasn't the loss of money or power. He felt sorry for that girl, Eliza. He remembered the first time he saw her photo. He'd thought he'd fallen in love. But now he realized he'd been drawn to her because he saw a chance in her eyes. A chance for a normal life. For simple things. Coming home to the woman he loved. Having dinner together, talking. But he ruined everything. Instead of trying to be just a man for her, he became her jailer. He intimidated her, surrounded her with guards, controlled her every move. He thought that this way he would make her his forever. But in the end, he lost her. She ran away. And now he sat in a cell, realizing that she was his only real chance at happiness. And with his stubbornness and cruelty, he had destroyed that chance. The most important thing he realized was this: the strongest walls aren't concrete and bars. They're the walls a person builds around their own heart. He was so afraid of losing her that he pushed her to escape. And now his only companionship is the silence of his cell and the bitter thought that everything could have been different if he had once acted like a common man, not a mafia boss.